for my 11th birthday. It was a big, long-legged Morgan horse, and I got to ride him that spring and summer. And I was at the state fair showing cattle, and while I was at the fair, the horse was back in the woods, and there's a cornfield right next to the woods, and a brand new string of fence we just put up. And the horse found out that if he leaned on the fence, he'd get the first row of corn. Then if he put his foot on the fence and pushed it down, he could get to the second row of corn. So he'd run down that whole string of fence. And so while I was at the fair, Dad found out the fence was down, loaded the horse and took him to the market on his way to the fair to see me.
No more horse.
No more horse. About 9 months. I'm Wayne Irwin. This is my sister Janice Irwin. We want to give you a brief tour and brief history of the Hatch Irwin farm. We both grew up here with our sister Sandra. The story starts with the birth of our great-great-grandfather, Alfred Hatch. Alfred Hatch was born in 1805. He made the first purchase of land here of 32 acres in 1826. He and his wife, Martha, made an additional purchase of 32 acres in 1839. This tract of land was part of a larger parcel of 200 acres that was deeded to a William McDowell by Thomas Jefferson. We have the original deed for this signed by Thomas Jefferson. We're not sure why we ended up with the deed because this was parceled off into several parcels, but we do have the original deed. Enos Hatch made additional purchases of land to get the land to the 130 acres that it is today. 8 generations of the Hatch Irwin family have been on this farm, and 4 generations are represented here today with myself and Janice and our son John and his daughter Jenna and Jenna's son Jake. This is an aerial view of the farm as I remember it, approximately 1955 to 60. When it was with all the operation of the farm. This is when I was showing cattle, we had shirts. This was the back of my shirt that I used when I was showing cattle, John W. Irwin and Son. This room was added on in 1912, and this room was included the parlor, and then upstairs was 2 bedrooms.
I'm not only Wayne and Mimsey's only child, I'm the only grandchild. So I grew up in this house didn't actually live here, but spent a lot of time here as a young child growing up. And so I have a lot of fond memories of being here. When I would come down here and play, this was kind of the room that nobody was allowed to go into or spend much time at other than like Christmas and special events. But there was a box over in this corner beside the chair, and you could have as many toys as you wanted, but they all had to fit in that one box. And now when I see all the toys that my grandkids have, they definitely wouldn't fit in that one old box.
Enos Hatch remained on the farm, and he had 3 wives, and of those wives, there were 4 children were born, and only 1 remained to adulthood. Bertha was my grandmother. Bertha Hatch married Tom Irwin, and they had 5 children. Aunt Hazel, Aunt Marie, David Irwin, Melvin Irwin, and John Irwin, my father. John Irwin married Zona Tavener, and they had three children, myself, Sandra, and Janice. I was born in this house along with three other previous generations of the Hatch Irwin family. Originally, this room was the kitchen, and a big stove, wood-burning stove sat here that we had for all of our, prepared all the meals. And there was a reservoir on the end of the stove to heat water. So that was our source of hot water, was a reservoir in the stove. Sink hung on the wall here with a hand pump to pump water out of the well for the source of water.
The kitchen was a very integral part of all family events. There was a big table that sat right here that we all would sit around and eat. And again, every week every time I was here, there was always pie. A lot of the chicken was fried chicken that came right off the farm. When I was a little boy, one of the chickens ended up chasing me across the yard, and I remember my grandfather going over, catching the chicken, chopping its head off, and that's what we had for supper that night.
This was a family dinner set of dishes that was used for family dinners. We had, Grandma Irwin had a complete set of this dishes. This coverlet made in 1855, and they made these in two sections. You'll notice there's one center line here is made in two sections and then woven together. The weaver would stay with the family and live in the house to make the coverlet. Upon the death of my dad, John Irwin, in 1987, my sister, Sandra, and Janice and I inherited the farm. Sandra lived here until her death in 2022. Her ashes were put in the cemetery, in the Fancher Cemetery, and part of them were put spread around the tree, the lilac tree out in the front yard. Cows came in here to be milked through that door there, and there are 6 stanchions along that wall there, and so we milked 6 at a time. They come in, and every cow knew when she was supposed to be there and which stanchion she was in. Garden tractor that my dad made, he made the wagon for me as a Christmas present. But he had an ulterior motive because he could also pull that behind the tractor when he was cultivating corn. And my job was to, if he covered up a hill of corn, I would uncover it. This is a picture of the barn that we built in 1954. Building the barn, Dad laid the blocks. I mixed the mortar for the block laying, and they built the rafters out of timber. This is not the actual tractor, but this is the same vintage of tractor that we had on the farm when I was growing up. 1953 Massey Harris 30, Model 30 tractor that we had here.
They're also parked in this part of the barn was where my grandfather kept a New Holland 68 hay baler and some other hay equipment that he used for years and years. When he quit farming in the early 80s, he gave that baler and hay rake to me. And I used that baler that was sort of my summer job in high school and put myself through college, baling hay, and kind of carried on the tradition that Wayne and his cousin had done when they were down here.
Dad purchased the farm from his mother, Bertha, in 1946. And Bertha retained a life estate on the farm, so we made very few improvements as long as she lived. Upon her death in '53, we were able to start making improvements to the farm. The first improvement was to put indoor plumbing in the house and put in a bathroom.
Over my shoulder here is kind of where the chickens were that Wayne talked about, that my grandmother collected the eggs, cleaned them up, and sold those off the back porch, and people would come all the time and get those. So there was a block building back there that the chickens were in, and then there used to be another one in front of that was all enclosed with a fence, and the chickens were out there running during the day and then put in at night. And between the chicken houses and the back of the house was a large garden that, Sunday dinner with some onions and radishes, and maybe even the lettuce was coming directly out of the garden, and sweet corn grown and things like that right there. So a great way to grow up as a kid.
Some of the equipment that my dad made. This is a picture of the post hole digger. This is the shop where Grandpa built a lot of our equipment. And the original welder that he got was right here in the corner, a Sears welder. This is the granary where we stored grain in. And we have small grain in these bins here for soybeans and wheat. And there's oats bin up overhead. And so we ground feed for the livestock here. So Saturday morning was usually grinding feed for the cattle, hogs, and chickens. This is the barn with stored the hay in both mouths. And we'd fill this clear full of hay, as much as you get in here with bales of hay. And the cattle, dairy cattle, were down here in called a loafing shed. And they stay in here in the winter, and then they'd be out in pasture in the summer. First farm purchase was made in 1826. And so the state of Ohio has qualified this as a sesquicentennial farm. In another 3 years, it'll qualify as a bicentennial farm.
Just buy my ticket, I pick up the phone. I'm calling to tell you